Good afternoon, class, and welcome to our second to last afternoon read aloud. I hope that you enjoyed this. Thank you so much for watching these videos. I love doing these read alouds. This is one of the best books of all time. A classic. I love reading this with the class. It was like one of my favorite parts of teaching, and I know I say everything is my favorite part of teaching, but this especially is. So thank you so much for watching, and we're going to break this up into 2 days because the last chapter is a little bit long and it's really important. So sometimes though, when we read, we come across something that is so well written. It's so good. It just makes you feel something. And we had that last chapter. So what happened to poor Charlotte? She died. Isn't that super sad? She helped Wilbur so much and she was such a good friend and she saved Wilbur's life. She had her egg sac, and then she died. And there's this little passage that is just so good, I have to read it again. It was at the end of the last chapter. So let me just reread it, because it's one of those that's just so good that you just want to read it again. And I wonder if you feel that way sometimes when you read. Something really just resonates with you. It makes you feel something. So this is the part that it's so perfectly written, I would not change one word. Ready? "Goodbye," she whispered. Then she summoned all her strength and waved one of her front legs at him. She never moved again. Next day, as the Ferris wheel was being taken apart and the race horses were being loaded into vans and the entertainers were packing up their belongings and driving away in their trailers, Charlotte died. The fairgrounds were soon deserted. The sheds and the buildings were empty and forlorn. The infield was littered with bottles and trash. Nobody of the hundreds of people that had visited the fair knew that a gray spider had played the most important part of all. No one was with her when she died. Oh, isn't that it's so good. You gotta read it again. What writing that is. Awesome job, E.B. White. That is so well written, and it's sad, but it's just beautiful writing. So sometimes we reread things. All right, this is the final chapter. We know Charlotte's dead, and Wilbur brought the egg sack back with him to the barn. So they were at the fair, Wilbur won the prize, and where did Wilbur put the egg sack? The only place he knew he could, in his mouth. He remembered Charlotte said it was waterproof, so he's keeping it in his mouth very carefully back to the barn because he wants the babies to be born at the barn. And how many babies are there? Over 500 baby spiders. Ew, gross. But we love Charlotte, and she was a great spider. So, you know what? Spiders aren't so bad after all. So, chapter 22, A Warm Wind. And so Wilbur came home to his beloved manure pile in the barn cellar. They're back home. His was a strange homecoming. Around his neck he wore a Medal of Honor. In his mouth he held a sack of spider's eggs. There is no place like home, Wilbur thought, as he placed Charlotte's 514 unborn children carefully in a safe corner. The barn smelled good. His friends, the sheep, and the geese were glad to see him back. The geese gave him a noisy welcome. Congratulations, they cried. Nice work. Mr. Zuckerman took the medal from Wilbur's neck and hung it on a nail over the pig pen, where visitors could examine it. Wilbur himself could look at it whenever he wanted to. In the days that followed, he was very happy. He grew to a great size. He no longer worried about being killed, for he knew that Mr. Zuckerman would keep him as long as he lived. Wilbur often thought of Charlotte. A few strands of her old web still hung in the doorway. Every day Wilbur would stand and look at the torn, empty web, and a lump would come to his throat. No one had ever had such a friend, so affectionate, so loyal, and so skillful. The autumn days grew shorter. Lurvy brought the squashes and pumpkins in from the garden and piled them on the barn floor where they wouldn't get nipped on frosty nights. The maples and birches turned bright colors, and the wind shook them, and they dropped their leaves one by one to the ground. Under the wild apple trees in the pasture, the little red apples lay thick on the ground, and the sheep gnawed them, and the geese gnawed them, and the foxes came in the night and sniffed them. One evening, just before Christmas, snow began falling. It covered house and barn and fields and woods. Wilbur had never seen snow before. When morning came, he went out and plowed the drifts in his yard for the fun of it. Fern and Avery arrived, dragging a sled. They coasted down the lane and out onto the frozen pond in the pasture. "Coasting is the most fun there is," said Avery. "The most fun there is," retorted Fern, "is when the Ferris wheel stops and Henry and I are at the top car and Henry makes the car swing and we can see everything for miles and miles and miles." "Goodness, are you still thinking about that old Ferris wheel?" said Avery in disgust. "The fair was weeks and weeks ago." "I think about it all the time," said Fern, picking snow from her ear. So Fern and her older brother are talking, and what is Fern thinking about? Henry Fussy on that Ferris wheel. Our little Fern is growing up, and what season is it? It's winter time. How do we know it's winter? Did it say it is winter? It might have. But we do know it's winter time because they are sledding and there's snow coming. So we're smart, we're close readers, we can infer, so we can figure out it's not summertime if it's snowing, it's not fall. Fall is when the leaves fall and they change colors. Now it's winter. So we know it's winter. Wilbur's seeing his first snow. After Christmas, the thermometer dropped to 10 below zero. Brr. Cold settled on the world. The pasture was bleak and frozen. The cows stayed in the barn all the time now, except on sunny mornings when they went out and stood in the barnyard in the lee of the straw pile. The sheep stayed near the barn too, for protection. When they were thirsty, they ate snow. The geese hung around the barnyard the way boys hang around a drugstore, and Mr. Zuckerman fed them corn and turnips to keep them cheerful. "Many, many, many thanks," they always said when the food was coming. Templeton moved indoors when winter came. His ratty home under the pig trough was so chilly, so he fixed himself a cozy nest in the barn behind the grain bins. He lined it with bits of dirty newspapers and rags, and whenever he found a trinket or a keepsake, he carried it home and stored it there. He continued to visit Wilbur 3 times a day, exactly at mealtime, and Wilbur kept his promise he had made. Wilbur let the rat eat first. Then, when Templeton couldn't hold another mouthful, Wilbur would eat. As a result of overeating, Templeton grew bigger and fatter than any rat you ever saw. He was gigantic. He was so big as a young woodchuck. An oversized fat rat. The old sheep spoke to him about his size one day. "You would live longer," said the old sheep, "if you ate less." "Who wants to live forever?" sneered the rat. "I am naturally a heavy eater, and I get untold satisfaction from the pleasures of the feast." He patted his stomach, grinned at the sheep, and crept upstairs to lie down. All winter, Wilbur watched over Charlotte's egg sack as though he were guarding his own children. And here's the fat Templeton. So why did Templeton get so fat? Remember Wilbur's promise. "Templeton, if you go get those eggs," because Templeton was the only one that could crawl up and get Charlotte's eggs, "I will let you eat first from my trough every single day." And of course Wilbur kept his promise, and of course Templeton visits Wilbur 3 times a day whenever Wilbur gets fed, and Templeton eats until he can't eat anymore, and then he lets Wilbur eat. So that's why Templeton got so fat. All right, we're almost done. So Wilbur has Charlotte's egg sack as though he's guarding his own children. He had scooped out a special place in the manure for the sack next to the board fence. On very cold nights, he laid so that his breath would warm it. For Wilbur, nothing in life was so important as this small round object. Nothing else mattered. Patiently, he awaited the end of winter and the coming of the little spiders. Life is always a rich and steady time when you are waiting for something to happen or to hatch. The winter ended at last. All right, so winter is over. Where's the egg sack? Wilbur is guarding it like he is guarding his own children. Why does he care about that egg sack so much? Because that's what Charlotte left behind, and he promised Charlotte he would take care of her babies. We'll see about that, Wilbur. Can you take care of 514 babies? I don't think so. You could barely take care of yourself. But we'll see what happens. I wonder what you think. How is this story going to end? Where are all these spiders going to go? What's going to happen with Templeton? Anything else going to happen? We still have maybe a little bit more than half of this chapter left. I will read that tomorrow. Thanks so much for watching. Have a wonderful afternoon, and I will see you all soon.